Oh, look who it is. Thanks for coming. So many conscientious students just looking to figure out how to make their notes for the research paper. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today. This whole thing will take less than 10 minutes, and once I'm done, you can go ahead and start actually taking your notes, or at least seeing what's out there. We're still in step 2 of the research process, and I just want to go over what we've gone through so far. On Thursday, we talked about how we want to find our comprehensive, reliable research primarily in the databases provided. On Friday, we talked about how to avoid plagiarism, and we should have noticed that a big part of that is making sure that we're organized and responsible about conducting research. And part of that is making sure it's clear when we're directly quoting, when we're summarizing, and when we're paraphrasing. And today we're going to talk about note. So the first thing you want to do for your note taking is to go to the research and note taking subtab of the research paper page. Scroll down past all of the slides, presentations, and everything, and open up this notes template. Now, remember what a template is. It's like a blueprint. And so we don't want to write on this. Instead, we want to go to File, make a copy, and rename it Research Notes, your last name. Also, you want to fill in everything that you can involving the header and the heading of your paper in MLA format. And this gets a lot of this stuff done so that we don't have to worry about it later on. I already have the actual due date of the paper. At this point, we don't have to worry about a title, and you don't have to worry about a thesis until you have some of your notes done. And I put the primary sources first. Everybody's source A and source B are going to be your 2 novels. And you can't really take notes on those until you've gotten your secondary notes from the critics. So I just have these here as examples, but skip that and go down to your secondary sources. And I'm going to take you through some of the formatting for this, but you can change it a little bit, meaning as long as you keep the spirit of it. If you don't want to color code it, if you want to put your slug somewhere else, if you want to write direct quotes instead of DQ, you can do things like that. If you don't want to indent it, I don't care about that stuff, but you do need to include all of the main elements of this. And so let's say that you go into one of the databases and you find an article. The first thing you want to do is click citation and copy the citation as soon as you know that you're going to use this as a source. So you do have to read it over first. If you would like to save it to look at it later, you can download it or save it to your drive. But then you go to your notes and you paste the bibliographic citation after you put source C or source D or whatever it is. This is to absolutely ensure that we don't forget where we got it from. Also, eventually, we'll end up copying and pasting this down to the bottom of our document and making our works cited page. And it'll all be correct, and you won't have to scramble to get the works cited done the night before it's due. So then the notes. Each note has a letter associated with it. That letter just corresponds to what source it's from. And so you might have C1, and that's it. You might have C1, C2, C3. I really wouldn't go beyond 3 notes per secondary source because then you're kind of copying the article. Notice that these are also short. You can have 1 block quotation in your paper, just like we did for the drama essay, but we want to try to keep these pretty short so that we're not taking too much and just copying and pasting all these quotes in our paper, which just doesn't make for a good paper. And so the number here is just which of the C notes it is, C1, C2, and so on. The DQ here is identifying it as a direct quote. Now, that's not so important as long as you make sure that direct quotes end up in quotation marks and that paraphrases and summaries don't have quotation marks around them. I think that would be pretty easy to mess up. That's why I think it's a good idea for us to put DQ. This is going to be a direct quote. And remember, only half of your notes should be direct quotes. The others should be paraphrases and summaries. And then
we really want to make sure that we still put the author's last name or names, in this case of Amin Tunk. Some of these critics have some very interesting names. I wonder if that somehow impacted their decision to become a critic. Anyway, and I put that in all of these, all three of my notes. Notice that this one, I had to put down Jacobson quoted in Amin Tunk because the author of this source quoted Jacobson. And so I really want to give credit to Jacobson and not the person who used his quote. And so that's what you should do for that, is Jacobson QTD period in Amin Tunk. And then my third one here, even though it's just a summary, it's still his idea. And so I need to make sure that I cite it in parenthetical citations. And so you can see, though, the whole point of all this is so whenever I start to move this stuff around for my outline and start to put my paper organization together, I don't lose what kind of card it is. I don't lose what kind of note it is, excuse me. We used to all those years of doing note cards. I won't lose who wrote it, and it'll already be in MLA format. So I have one less thing that I have to do later on. The other thing that we want to include is a slug. A slug is just the topic of the card. And in the 20 cards that we have, we really should only have maybe 2, 3, 4 at the most slugs. So they should repeat. And so in the case of this paper that I'm writing about The Great Gatsby and The Fabulous Freddie, my made up novel to compare it to, here I'm trying to prove that the title characters, meaning Gatsby and Freddie, that they distort the American dream and this leads to their downfall. And so it makes sense for me to have one of my slugs being the past, because that's what they're trying to recapture. And so I might have one of those in C, I might have had one of those down in D, I might have one in E. And that'll help me whenever I'm trying to organize my paper into premises, because I'll have maybe one premise all about the past. Then maybe I have a slug called Early Dream, meaning, the Dan Cody stuff, the idea of the dream, and before really the beginning of the book tells about Gatsby from Nick's perspective. And so here I have a paraphrase. Once again, it's still cited in MLA format. And this one called Early Dream would also probably repeat itself from one source to the next. Finally, for C3 here, the slug that I used is intro idea, because this one's really general. And I'm not sure that I'd be able to use it in my actual paper because it's about the American dream and where it came from. And it just so happens in this article that he mentions that. And this just might be a nice idea for me to mention in my introduction. And so I'm just saving that. Next, the rubric, how you'll be scored on this. It's out of 50 points, so it's a substantial grade. And this is not included, by the way, in the big final grade for the research paper. So it's 6 points for you coming up with a thesis statement and editing it. And by the time you get to the end of your notes, you really should even list a couple possible premises, though we're not in outline mode yet. 10 points will be for having 4 or more reliable secondary sources. Remember, these should probably not be from the public internet. They should be from the databases. If you try to use anything from Shmoop or GradeSaver or all those things, as somebody does every year, then I'm just going to give it back to you and tell you to do it over again. And a paper won't be accepted if you have any of that in there. And so we need to have strong, reliable secondary sources. Then 24 points for the notes themselves. And remember that we need 10 of them from the book, but you wouldn't do that until after you know what you're going to be writing about. You have to do the secondary notes first before you go back and find things in the 2 books. And all of this, of course, should fit under the umbrella of your thesis. They should all logically prove your thesis in some small way. And then the last part is 10 points for format, that you're identifying what kind of note it is, that you're including a slug, and that slug repeats throughout, and that you're citing everything using parenthetical MLA citations. So to sum up, we want to make sure that we're recording our bibliographic citations, and for any internet sources that we're using websites like BibMe or EasyBib to compile those and also copy and paste those into our notes. We always want to make it clear if it's a direct quote and also put quotation marks around it, or if it's a summary or paraphrase. We want to develop a thesis as we're going, and to understand that this is going to be revised quite a bit. We want to include our parenthetical citations, which in most cases is just going to be the author's last name, especially for the critics. For your primary sources, it's going to be author and then a space and then the page number. We want to make sure that we include slugs so that we know what each note is about. And as for the requirements, we probably want to go a little bit beyond having 4 secondary sources, just in case we have to cut one out, have 5 or 6 maybe. And then when it comes to being 6 sources overall, that's including the 2 primary sources. When it comes to the notes requirements, we need to have 5 notes that are by critics about your first novel, 5 notes from critics about your second number, and these should be from a variety of sources. Then, after you do that, you want to find 5 notes from your first novel, just direct quotes from the book, paraphrases from the book, summaries, and 5 from the second novel. Thank you so much for listening, and hope to see you all tomorrow.